Welcome to Elle Loves Miracles. What happens when oxygen runs out 300 feet under the sea? This isn't deep sea diving. This is survival where pressure crushes metal and one wrong move means game over. This is a miracle story that defies logic and science. We're talking about Chris Lemons. He was a saturation diver who was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, but he grew up in Cambridge, England. Chris wasn't born with a scuba tank strapped to his back. He lived a pretty normal childhood. Picture a lanky 6'4" kid. He was probably unsure of what he wanted to do with his life. In his early 20s, he was kind of drifting, like a lot of us at that age. He stumbled into working as a deckhand on dive support vessels in the North Sea, which is basically the oil and gas industry's backyard. Working on those ships, Chris got a front row seat to the world of saturation divers. Guys who seemed like superheroes, disappearing into the ocean for weeks at a time to fix pipelines and oil rigs at insane depths. They were mysterious, rolling up to the docks in nice cars. But it wasn't just the cash or the cool factor that hooked him. He saw something romantic, almost heroic, in what they did. It became his ambition to join their ranks, to be one of those elite divers who could handle the ocean's darkest, coldest corners. Getting there wasn't easy. Saturation diving is like the special forces of the diving world, super competitive with only a handful of spots for a ton of hopefuls. Chris started by qualifying as an air diver, which meant a 12-week course to learn how to dive with compressed air, limited to 50 meters. He spent about 7 years grinding as an air diver, racking up dives, building experience, and proving himself to the offshore world. It was tough, physical work, often in rough seas, and you had to know the right people to even get a shot at the next level. Finally, he made it to saturation diving, which involves living in a pressurized chamber for up to 28 days. Breathing in helium-oxygen mix called heliox to work at depths of up to 900 feet. By 2012, at the age of 32, he'd been a sat diver for about 18 months, working in the North Sea's oil fields, a job that paid nearly €1,000 a day, but demanded nerves of steel. Chris wasn't just a diver, he was building a life. He was engaged to Morag Martin, a gregarious woman he met at a party 5 years earlier. They were planning a wedding and building a house together in the Highlands, near Mallaig, Scotland. Life was looking up, but the job meant long stretches away, 4 weeks at a time, living in a claustrophobic chamber with 11 other divers, breathing heliox that made your voice sound like a chipmunk. It was a grind, but Chris loved it, even if the lack of sunlight in tight quarters messed with your head. On September 18th of 2012, Chris was working a routine 6-hour shift, 127 miles east of Aberdeen in the Huntington oil field. He was about 300 feet down, which is 90 meters, below the North Sea's surface. He was part of a 3-man team with Duncan Alcock, his mentor with 17 years of experience, and Dave Uwasa, another seasoned diver. Their job was to repair a pipeline on a massive oil manifold, a structure the size of a house. They were working off the Bibi Topaz, a 348-foot dive support vessel with a 130-man crew, connected to the surface by a diving bell, a pressurized taxi that took them to and from the seabed. Saturation diving is intense because you're living at the same pressure as the depth you're working in to avoid decompression sickness. The team lived in a hyperbaric chamber on the ship, pressurized to about 90 meters. Each day, they'd climb into the diving bell, get lowered through a hole in the ship's hull, and work in near freezing water. Their lifelines were their umbilicals, cables that supplied heliox, hot water to keep their suits warm, light, and communications. Without those, they were screwed. That day started like any other day. Chris and Dave were on the manifold with Duncan in the bell, managing their umbilicals. Craig Frederick, the dive supervisor, was topside, keeping an eye on things. The North Sea was rough, 35-knot winds and 5-meter swells, but nothing the Bibby Topaz couldn't handle, or so they thought. Around 2 a.m., the ship's dynamic positioning system, a computer that keeps the vessel stationary without an anchor, crashed. No one knows exactly why, but the backups failed too. The 8,000-ton ship started drifting in the storm, pulling the diving bell and the divers' umbilicals with it. Chris was inside the manifold when alarms started blaring over the comms. Craig's voice came through urgent. "Get back to the bell, now." Dave made it back exhausted, but Chris's umbilical got snagged on a metal outcrop called a transponder bucket. The drifting ship yanked the cable tighter and tighter. Chris knew he was in deep trouble. First, the comms line snapped, cutting him off from the team. Then, the gas hose stretched until he had nothing to breathe. He twisted the knob on his helmet to open his emergency helix tank, which had maybe 5 to 6 minutes of gas. Within 30 seconds, the umbilical broke completely, with a sound like a shotgun blast. Chris fell to the seabed 300 feet down, in total darkness, with no heat, no light, and a ticking clock on his air supply. He was lost in the dark searching for the manifold. He lit 2 flares for light while searching for the manifold. Finally, on the second try, he identified the manifold and climbed to the top, clipping himself to it to avoid drifting off. But the diving bell was gone, and he had already burned through a couple minutes of gas. The math wasn't good. Rescue was at least 40 minutes away, and he had maybe 3 minutes left. Alone in the pitch-black freezing water, Chris faced the reality that he was probably going to die. He curled up in the fetal position, and his thoughts turned to Morag, their unfinished house, and the life they'd planned together. Fear gave way to grief, then a strange calm. He blacked out, assuming that was it. When the DP system on the ship failed, it was a full-on nightmare. The DP is like the ship's autopilot, using GPS, thrusters, and computers to keep it locked in place over the drivers. Even in rough seas with 35-knot winds and 5-meter swells like it was that night. It's critical for saturation diving because the diving bell and the divers' umbilicals are tethered to the ship. If it drifts, everything gets yanked around, which is exactly what happened to Chris. At this point, it would be a miracle if he survived or if they could get to him in time. The DP system didn't just glitch, it completely shut down, and the backup systems failed to kick in. This wasn't a simple, oh, let's tweak the settings moment. Ships like the BB have manual control as a last resort. The bridge crew can take over the thrusters and helm to try stabilizing the vessel, but it's a beast to handle manually, especially in rough seas with divers below. The BB had a 130-man crew, including engineers and bridge officers, so they likely tried everything, including manual inputs, to regain control. What we do know, it took about 40 minutes to get the ship back into position. The crew was fighting to restore the DP system, which suggests they were troubleshooting the computers and thrusters while the ship drifted. Manual control in a DP failure is possible but brutal. Imagine trying to keep an 8,000-ton ship steady in a storm, with divers' lives on the line. Manual operation often involves the captain or bridge team wrestling with thruster controls, but it's slow and imprecise compared to DP. I couldn't find an official report that confirmed that they went full manual, but it's likely they at least attempted it while the engineers worked on the DP. However it went down, the priority was to get the ship back over the divers, and they managed to do that. Dave and Duncan, his teammates, were in the Bell. They could only watch grainy footage from a remotely operated vehicle showing Chris's motionless body. It took 33 to 41 minutes for the crew to get the ship back into position. Chris had gone without oxygen for close to 30 minutes. Dave dove back down, expecting to recover a body. When he reached Chris, he was blue and unresponsive. David dragged him to the Bell, where Duncan started CPR, not holding out much hope though. After 2 breaths, Chris inhaled, opened his eyes, and gave a weak thumbs up. Chris was alive. No one's 100% sure how Chris survived nearly 40 minutes with only 5 minutes of gas. The leading theory is that saturation diving saved him. His body was saturated with heliox, which has a higher oxygen content than regular air, about 4 times richer. This likely kept his tissues oxygenated enough to sustain him, especially since the cold water, around 3 degrees Celsius, slowed his metabolism, possibly inducing a hypothermia-like stasis. Some experts suggest selective brain cooling, where cold blood prioritizes the brain, but it's not confirmed. The director, Alex Parkinson, who made the documentary Last Breath, noted that Chris passed out at just the right moment to balance oxygen depletion and hypothermia, avoiding both suffocation and freezing to death. It was a freak combination of luck, training, and science, but I call it a miracle. One other factor to take into consideration is the mammalian diving reflex. It's an innate physiological response in mammals, including humans, that optimizes survival during submersion in water, particularly in cold water. It is most pronounced in aquatic mammals like seals and dolphins, but it is also present in humans to a lesser extent. The reflex is triggered when the face is submerged in cold water, below 21 Celsius or 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and it involves a series of automatic physiological changes designed to conserve oxygen and protect vital organs. Key components of the diving reflex: number 1, bradycardia. It's a slowed heart rate. Upon submersion, the heart rate slows significantly, reducing oxygen consumption. In humans, heart rate can drop by 10 to 25% or more, depending on water temperatures and individual factors. In extreme cases, like in trained divers or infants, it may decrease by up to 50%. This conserves oxygen by reducing the metabolic demand of the heart and other tissues. Number 2 is peripheral vasoconstriction. Blood vessels in the extremities, like the arms, legs, and skin, constrict, redirecting blood flow away from non-essential tissue to prioritize the brain and the heart and organs that are most sensitive to oxygen deprivation. This ensures that the available oxygen is used where it's needed most. Number 3, the blood shifts. In deep diving, increased water pressure causes blood to shift from the limbs to the thoracic cavity or the chest, filling the lungs' blood vessels to prevent lung collapse. While more pronounced in marine mammals, this occurs to a lesser extent in humans, aiding oxygen storage in the core. Number 4 is reduced metabolism. The body's metabolic rate decreases, particularly in cold water, as the lower temperature slows cellular process. This reduces the rate at which oxygen is consumed, extending the time the body can function without breathing. Last but not least, number 5 is apnea, breath holding. The reflex promotes prolonged breath, holding by suppressing the urge to breathe, even as carbon dioxide levels rise. This is particularly strong in infants who naturally hold their breath when submerged. Chris was back in the water 3 weeks later, diving at the exact same spot to finish the job. He had to spend 4 days in the hyperbaric chamber post-accident for decompression, where medics checked him for brain damage and other issues. Incredibly, he was fine, physically and mentally. He didn't even feel traumatized, though he later admitted that it took years to grasp the enormity of what had happened. A few months later, Chris married Morag. They finished building their house. They're no longer together, but he's got a new partner and 2 kids, living in the south of France now. He kept saturation diving for another 9 years until 2022, when he switched to a supervisor role, staying dry and staying safe on the ship, directing divers. The job's still in his blood, but he's glad to be out of the chamber's grind. His story blew up after the 2019 documentary Last Breath, which used real footage and audio from the accident, plus interviews with Chris, Duncan, Dave, and Morag. It's raw and terrifying. A Hollywood version came out in 2025 starring Finn Cole as Chris and Woody Harrelson as Duncan. Chris loves the film and he's embraced his fame, becoming a public speaker. He talks about resilience, teamwork, and safety at conferences worldwide, from Australia to Aberdeen, including gigs with the Society of Petroleum Engineers and the Offshore Technology Conference. He's had other close calls, an avalanche and being swept out to sea. But the North Sea incident defined him. He doesn't dwell on it though. For him, it's just part of the job, a significant event that somehow turned into a positive force in his life. As for Duncan and Dave, they were physically unharmed but emotionally rattled. Duncan continued working as a saturation diver after the incident. His 17 years of experience in 2012 suggest he was in his 40s, so he might still be in the industry or could have retired by now, as divers often step back in their 50s due to the physical toll. Dave also kept diving after the incident. His courage in going back for Chris earned him major respect, highlighted in the documentary and the 2025 film. In an interview, Dave mentioned the incident gave him a new perspective on the risks of the job, but he didn't let it stop him. He was likely in his 30s in 2012, so he could still be active in the industry, possibly as a diver or a supervisor. The offshore diving world is small, and surviving something like that would have made them legends among their peers. They likely face the same grueling schedule, 4 weeks on, 4 weeks off, living in chambers and breathing helium, until they either moved up to supervisor roles or stepped away. Duncan and Dave were the unsung heroes of Chris's survival. Duncan's CPR and Dave's ballsy rescue dive made the difference between a miracle and a tragedy. They kept doing their thing afterwards, diving into the same dangerous world, though they've stayed out of the limelight compared to Chris. It's wild to think they went back to work like it was just another day. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.